Hi, Sammer.
Hi.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. You and I actually have known each other for a while now, going back to like undergrad university. And now you wear many hats, one of which being the CEO of Dipit. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
All right. So as you spoke about undergrad, I went to Indus Valley, and I started out with wanting to do design, and then after the first year, I decided I don't want to make ads for 4 years. So I chose to take a creative path, and I went to fine art. I graduated as a fine artist, and I thought I would pursue it. And I did for about a year, and at the end of it, I went to Sotheby's and I did art and business there. Any love that I had for art as a commercial enterprise was absolutely killed there. And so when I came back, I joined my father's business and I set up a creative department there, and started my journey in corporate as an executive. And because I didn't graduate from a business school, I felt like my peers, everyone my age, would just join in from CBM and IB and LUMS. I felt like I lacked a little bit of that credibility when it came to decision making and or even having a voice. Everyone really perceived me, she's the owner's daughter, she's done fine arts, what does she know about business? So one of the first ventures that I started was actually with another friend from Indus who's called Paiman, and we started a business called Lollipop and Laddu. And we were doing that full time for about a few years, and I got married and I moved to the Philippines. There I got a chance to travel, see the world a lot more independently, and saw a lot more of Asia than I had ever done before. I came back, and again I'd been involved with my father's business, so that seemed like a natural fit. Got back to doing that, and still didn't feel like there was something that I was being able to express or have my own freedom. So I decided that I'd wanted to open a restaurant for a really long time, and my husband was also at the time where he was feeling he'd spent 15 years in corporate. We wanted to do something for ourselves, so we opened a restaurant called Wing It, and that's where the journey that eventually led to Dipit began there. I tried to convince the board and the family and the management at Shan that we should have our range of sauces, but at the time there were so many imported options available that everyone felt like it's a very niche market, there isn't much potential here. So when I started Wing It, we started manufacturing our sauces ourselves. First we were buying it from the market, and we realized this is not sustainable. How are people affording this? This is all coming from abroad, and why can't we make something like this here? So we started small batches for whatever we needed. Then we scaled up a little bit as our restaurant started doing well. Friends and other restaurant owners started approaching us, and we like the sauce of yours, we're using barbecue, we're using imported, it's expensive, can you give it to us? So we started supplying to our friends within the business a lot earlier than we even launched the brand. And we had a little bit of sales going there, and when we saw the potential, that's when we realized maybe we should launch it as a B2B brand, and let's see where it goes from there. The decision to go retail came very, very shortly after, because that was always the goal, but the journey there, it's much harder, and we'll get into the challenges we face when setting up something like this. So then we arrived at a point where we decided that we have to do this full time and scale it as much as we can, because there's a huge potential for this.
Right. It's really interesting because you were on the side of the restaurants initially, where you first felt the problem, you identified, okay, this is a problem that we are going through. And then I remember Wing It, when I tried it, I was like, wait, all of these options are available in all these different flavors, and how can I take this at home with me? So I was looking at it from a purely retail perspective. I want the sauce that they're using.
Actually, a lot of people also started coming to us, and we'd sell the dips in like these plastic dip boxes, dip cups for 50 rupees. So we'd have like mothers come to us and be like, I want like 50 of your this sauce, and she'd bring a jar and be like, isme dal dein. So we're like, okay. Clearly people want to take it home and use it with their other food, or they're ordering wings and ordering the sauce on the side separately, so they want to be able to use it with other food. So we noticed that. So I think that also gave us a push. But again, the challenges of how to take something that is just an idea into something that is a retail product on a shelf, that's an incredibly tough journey.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I see there seems like there has been a journey going from, you know, first being a restaurant, finding that problem, and then going into, you know, O&I, like selling to other restaurants in the HoReCa sector first, while, you know, there's this people coming in and showing you that, okay, you know, we want this in our home as well. So could you talk about that journey, the challenges you faced and all?
So first, obviously when you're setting up a brand, you want it to be distinct. You don't want it to be like every other brand in the market, whether it's the packaging or the product or even the way you're communicating. So for us, we really felt like we wanted to differentiate Dip It from anything available here, and that had to start with the packaging. And the packaging there's two parts to it, the label and the bottle. We were very clear, okay, we wanted to go in a glass bottle. The challenge with that is that when you're a small scale manufacturer and you don't know your volumes, the only options available to you are Botal Gali. And you get an assortment of bottles that already people are using and buying. So if I smack my label on a bottle that looks exactly like my competition, I'm not setting it apart. So then we started going to look at glass manufacturers, okay, bhai, let's get our own bottle made. That turned out to be another nightmare, because when we approached, there are only two big manufacturers of glass in Pakistan. I don't know if people know that. So we approached the bigger one and we spoke to them and said, you know, हमें बोतलें बना के दें आप. तो he asked us volume क्या है. Like अब उस वक्त कुछ अंदाज़ा नहीं था. तुमने कहा 1000-2000 बोतलें चाहिएंगी. So he just laughed at us. He said, you know, go come back when your volume is in like hundreds of thousands, because I can't do it. So he refused, and then we had to go and find like the bottle we eventually went with was hand blown and baked in bhattis in some, I don't want to, in some rural part of Sindh, because they were willing to do it and they were willing to work with smaller quantities. So initially the bottles had like bubbles in them, they weren't perfect, but that's all we could do. And with regards to the labeling and packaging, man, I really felt like labeling in Pakistan is very cluttered. I love minimalism as an aesthetic, and I really felt like we don't need to put like the picture of what we're selling onto the label. People are reading it. The target market that I'm looking at is educated, and they know barbecue. उनको तस्वीर नहीं देखनी with the skewer on it to know that it's barbecue sauce. So and I didn't really have to worry too much about that anyways, because यहाँ पे सिर्फ ketchup और chili garlic ही बेच रहे थे लोग. So definitely wanted to stay away from being a ketchup and chili garlic brand, and wanted to be a sauces brand for sure. That's why initially when we launched, we didn't launch in a pouch format, because I didn't really find it very appealing aesthetically. I felt like people don't want to put the pouch on the table. But then we got so much feedback from moms saying कि please, you know, हमारे बच्चे शीशे की बोतल तोड़ देते हैं, आप pouch में launch करें. So we had to take the plunge, but we tried to keep our aesthetic as close to the glass bottle as possible, and we didn't want to then become another brand on the shelf with the same 20 things on it.
Right.
So those were, from a packaging and packaging standpoint, those were some of our challenges. Listing is another huge thing that, you know, people kind of underestimate. You can get your product into a few shelves. Maybe you know, the top end retail will take your product and keep 2 or 3 things and see if they work. But really, where you really start to make a mark in the market is when you scale up and you go to your metros and your hyperstars and your imtiazes of the world. वहाँ पे entry करना और shelf में जगह बनाना आसान नहीं है. It's actually a huge challenge. You have to negotiate for months on contracts, and, you know, negotiate on displays and how much money you're going to give them. I think it can get very daunting very, very quickly, and there's listing fees, and every time they open a store you have to pay them some money. So it becomes very expensive to try to get into these stores. And when you do, of course, the scalability, you were selling 100 bottles, now you're selling 10,000. Your production has to then catch up. Everything has to catch up to this now new demand that you have. So उस तरह के challenges शुरू में बहुत, because you're scaling very quickly. In our case, we were scaling at maybe like 200% every year. So that meant that something that worked a year before is suddenly not going to make sense anymore. the working capital, I had to suddenly now be managing a much larger business. So those things were very challenging early and we didn't know. We were putting all our money into it, all our time, our energy, and we didn't know if we were going to get anything out of it, if there really was a demand.
Right.
And of course, there's a lot of hesitance from trade as well. Why should we keep your product? We haven't seen any advertisement of this. We've never heard of this.
Right.
We've never tried this.
Right.
So there was a lot of resistance in that regard too. उसमें हमारे जो B2B में हमने मेहनत की थी वो थोड़ी सी, it came into fruition because people saw the sachets before they saw anything else. If you ordered your food from Burger O'Clock or any of our other customers at the time, or Domino's, or आपको वो sachet मिल रहा था, you'd seen it there. So some people had started to get a little bit of awareness. Okay, there is a brand that exists. We've tried one of their products, it wasn't bad. Let me try it again. Scaling also meant hiring a lot more employees than we had before. We had a very small team, and so expanding on the team has its own challenges. When you're a small company and you're not even a tech startup or a startup of that kind, attracting good talent who's willing to leave bigger names and bigger companies and just an overall more wholesome experience for someone who's just starting out at the time was a bit challenging for us, to get appropriate people to come in, because we obviously wanted talented people who would make work fun and exciting, and that wasn't necessarily the people who were coming to approach us.
Right.
So वो हमने overcome किए. We started, word of mouth से, like if one employee came in and they're like, oh, one of my friends, उसका कोई भाई है, he's done his graduation from IBA, he's looking for a job. So from referrals we got a lot of people, career fairs, and we didn't have any departments as such. It was me, Zishan, and a few core employees who were looking at, like, say, finance, or we hired a person in marketing, and she was a one-man army.
Right.
And like everything. So it was tough. And we weren't doing a lot in terms of mainstream advertising, mostly limited to social media and digital marketing. But as we know, that in itself is an entire world.
Right. Yeah.
So where do you want to go down? Do you want to go down Google Ads? Do you want to target Facebook, Instagram? When you're a new brand, you don't have any paid, like no one likes your page. You don't have any, you don't have an organic following. Okay, so now we start talking about content. Okay, now we start talking about communication. Okay, let's make an ad. Let's make a DVC. So we did that, and we wanted something that was attention grabbing, but also something that could be, edited down into many formats. So when you go and look at our ads now, you'll realize that they're actually shot in a way where we can then play with them, add them as bumpers, take little piecemeals out of them and try to use them to maximize our communication. I think that helped. I think the language, the aesthetic, the way we were communicating, it was different from what other brands in our category were doing, which was still very centered around family, mom, that kind of a dynamic.
And I think that's something which is very common across the board in Pakistani brands, and even international brands, MNCs that come into Pakistan, they fall into the same kind of personality and structure of the, family oriented, mother oriented, and they end up all having the same personality. And I really like what you talked about, earlier in the conversation, where you talked about, you guys went out and wanted your own unique bottles, because I don't think a lot of people realize when it comes to branding, it's not just about your logo, it's not just about the color that you're using, which are your brand colors. There's so much more. It's the entire customer journey and all the touch points that they have with you.
Absolutely.
So, I want to talk, expand on that.
So with the mother thing, I think that when brands come in, they do research. And the research tells them, okay, so this woman is the one, she cooks for children, she cooks for herself, she looks after the husband. She may be very modern, she may have a job, she may be someone who's very emancipated, but khana is her domain. So when we are talking about food products, usually they say that the decision maker, maybe she's the one who's going and making the shopping list, she's the one who's going buying the product, तो हम उससे बात करते हैं. But what I felt was that, as I'm a mother, I have 3 children, but I'm also somebody who's an avid traveler. I love adventure. I'm someone who's, a very adrenaline junkie almost. So why can't I be targeted as this instead of just being, mother, very nicely plating food for her children. So in our second ad, you'll see these people with like purple hair, you have a hijabi, you have a guy who's bald. We wanted to be able to talk to people who may be mothers or fathers or parents or caregivers, but also individuals. And uniqueness is important to us. You are more than what your role is in life. You are an individual. So we want to talk to those people. Still, maybe, I'm not saying maybe in the future we might go down this route, but want to still do it in a different way.
Right.
Rather than just mom standing in the kitchen cooking something for her kids.
Right.
Because research mein wo nikal ke aata hai, so I think most people tend to find that that's a safer way to spend their ad money. Which is why you see on TV there's very little variety in terms of communication. Sab formulaic hi chala rahe hain. We had a lot of difficulty with that.
Right.
And that difficulty was, okay, you're a young brand talking to young kids, Gen Z, etc. Okay, why don't you make a rap video with neon signs at the back and music and call it an anthem? And we didn't want to do that because you're already on social media. We realize it's been done, and it's been done since a while. So why are we being still pitched these ideas? There was a lot of frustration कि क्या हम stupid हैं कि हम वो rap video नहीं बना रहे या हम क्या करें? So that process, because maybe for MNCs and larger organizations, they have that flexibility where like, okay, it's just one campaign, we'll do it this way. For us, it was this is how much money we have, this is what we can do. We have that one shot to make it, and we'll have to run this the whole year. So how are we going to maximize our communication? तो हम तो ये नहीं कर सकते कि हम risk ले लें. हमें बहुत सोच समझ के ये decisions लेने पड़ रहे थे.
But for a lot of those MNC brands, from a different perspective, what you guys are doing is taking a huge risk by not following the same formula, which I guess has been working, which is why
it works because when you get to a certain scale, you have to start talking to masses, and when you start talking to masses, then suddenly you realize you can have all these other considerations. So in my journey now, I feel like we're at that stage where we scale to a point where like, okay, now we're talking to the masses. Can I now communicate in the same manner that I was doing before? We're going to try. We're going to try, but I don't know uska execution kis tarah se nikal ke aati, but we do want to do something different.
Right.
I think that's important because we're bored of watching the same content on TV, on our social media.
So we spoke a lot about different brands and all the content, and some of it just seems recycled, right? And I feel like sometimes the ones that really stand out, like everyone doing the same kind of challenge, and the one that gets the most pull from audience is the one that's unique because of the personality that the brand is able to bring through. So what do you think goes into the DNA of making a personality for a brand that really lasts and sticks out?
I think deciding on the brand personality and kind of sticking to it. We wanted Dipit to be very bold. We wanted Dipit to be exciting and fun. And I know other brands in other categories operate in this sort of space, but in our category, no one had. So that allowed us a little bit of flexibility to kind of work with these ideas. And we want to continue to do that. I think no matter what the business problem is, we want to solve it through a fun and creative and exciting way of, like an example I'll give you is we did this sound box with Ali Gulpir, where we had this interception in department stores where if you went, we wanted people to come to our shelf. So you can put like these shelf talkers and these little papers that try to bring your attention, but we felt like it wasn't working. We wanted a quick and fun solution. So we had these sensor boxes where if you crossed by them, Ali's voice would come out and be like, hey, come and try out, this barbecue sauce is the best one. And Ali's voice is pretty recognizable. So it really, we got a lot of great feedback. We got a lot of interested people messaging us and being like appreciative of it. So when you do try to do something different and exciting, I think people respond to it.
Yeah. And it seems like you also picked a very unique personality that would go with your brand.
Yeah, of course. So we have to choose anyone who's kind of endorsing your product has to have that similar vibe or have that kind of personality which ties into it. Getting a very sort of serious person to talk about Dipit. I guess we could do it and try to be funny because then it could be a contrast, but we wanted someone relatable, someone who used the product, endorsed it himself, and kind of wanted to speak on it. So, that was an interesting way for us to work.
Sounds like a very wonderful campaign, bringing together your brand personality with technology to create something that's truly clutter breaking. So we do this small thing at the end of every interview. It's like a lightning round. So I'll ask you really quick questions and you answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay. So the first one is live to work or work to live?
Work to live to work. Both. Can it be both? Because when I'm enjoying myself at work, I'm living for work. But when it's time off, then that's the break I need to get back to work. So I enjoy both my time off and time at work.
Breathe in and
breathe out. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about branding. What's your favorite typeface?
I'll go with a safe answer, Helvetica.
Okay. Very safe answer.
Yeah, but I think it's something that's it's dynamic. It can be used in many different ways. I think it's a beautiful font and
multiple personalities can be created with it. Fair enough. If you could hire one historical figure to work in your company, who would it be?
Historical figure.
I mean, it doesn't have to be very historical. It could be someone recent too.
I guess I'd like to work with the people who created Micklehenney and Worcestershire. So Lee and Perrins, and would love to work with other sort of food scientists of the past. So yeah.
Interesting, very interesting, because there is a lot of food.
There's so much to learn from.
So much to learn from, especially with like 46 flavors. And more coming from what I hear.
Yes.
So if you didn't pick your current field of work, what would you pick? You could do it all over again.
I'd be a full-time adventurer. So like a mountaineer that's still something I'd love to do, but probably alongside.
Interesting. What book do you think everyone should read?
What book do I think everyone should read? I like Great Expectations. I think it's a book that teaches you a lot about the struggles of life and loss and pain. So I think it's a good book to read.
Interesting. I've read it when I was really young, too young. Okay. If you could work at any company in the world, past or present, for a short while even, which one would it be?
Just so that I can see the mania behind it, I'd like to work at Tesla maybe.
Okay. I think a lot of people would echo that sentiment.
Actually, a member of my family has worked there and she tells me it was terrible, but I'd like to see how terrible it was.
One skill that you wish you could have more of?
Diplomacy.
Fair enough. I think that comes to the end of our conversation.
Thank you.
It was great having you, Sammer. Thank you so much. And feel free to reach out for anything.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here and have a conversation about branding with you, and thank you for having me.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.